Good evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Claire, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm pleased to introduce this virtual event with Melissa Febos presenting her new book, Girlhood. She'll be in conversation with ZZ Packer. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new and expanded digital community during these challenging times. Thank you for joining us tonight in support of authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. Every week we're hosting events and our schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and even browse our shelves from home. After the introduction, I'll drop a link in the chat to purchase a copy of Melissa's new book. Your purchases and financial contributions, I'll also share a link to donate, make this virtual event series possible, and now more than ever, support the future of a landmark independent bookstore. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, you can go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual events below these many months, technical issues might arise. If they do, we will do our best to resolve them quickly. So thank you for your patience and understanding. Melissa Febos is the author of Whip Smart and Abandon Me, the latter a finalist for both a Lambda Literary Award and a Publishing Triangle Award. Melissa has been recognized by the MacDowell Colony, the Barbara Deming Foundation, Vermont Studios Center, and the Breadloaf Writers Conference, among others. And she is the inaugural winner of the Jean Cordova Prize for Lesbian Queer Nonfiction from Lambda Literary. She teaches in the nonfiction program at the University of Iowa, and you may be familiar with her work in The Believer, Tin House, and the New York Times, including a great piece in this past Sunday's magazine section. She'll be joined in conversation tonight by ZZ Packer, author of the blockbuster short story collection, Drinking Coffee Elsewhere, which won the Commonwealth Club Fiction Award, an Alex Award, and was a Penn Faulkner Award finalist. It was also named Notable Book by the New York Times. What does it mean to be a girl? What does it mean for other people to see you as a girl? What does it mean for the women we grow up to become? In her fantastic new book, Girlhood, Melissa Febos explores all this and more. Michelle Hart writes, every once in a while, a book comes along that feels so definitive, so necessary, that not only do you want to tell everyone to read it now, but you also find yourself wanting to go back in time to tell your younger self that you will one day get to read something that will make your life make sense. Melissa Febos' fierce nonfiction collection, Girlhood, might just be that book. Febos is one of our most passionate and profound essayists. It's a book that women will wish they had when they were younger, and they'll rejoice in having now. And for NPR, Alana Masad writes, by following Febos' distinct paths between the past and the present, we might realize there's room to forge our own, and that we've just been handed a flashlight that helps illuminate the way. And so now I am pleased to turn things over to tonight's speakers. Melissa and Zizi, the podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, I'm going to read from this book. Here we go. Here it is. I'm going to read from an essay in the collection called The Mirror Test, and I'm going to skip around. It has a whole bunch of stuff about House of Mirth and Jamaica Kincaid and the movie Easy A and a whole bunch of other stuff, and I'm not going to read any of that. I'm just going to read a little bit about the etymology of the word slut and a little anecdote from my experience with maybe a dash of Lacan, but don't worry, not too much Lacan. Okay. In the 18th century, sluts' pennies were hard nuggets in a loaf of bread that resulted from incomplete kneading. I imagine them salty and dense, soft enough to sink your teeth into, but tough enough to stick. What could a handful of sluts' pennies buy you? Nothing. A hard word, a slap in the face, a fast hand for your slow ones. Before it carried any sexual connotation, the word slut was a term for a slovenly woman, a poor housekeeper. A slut was the maid who left dust on the floor, slut's wool, or who left a corner of the room overlooked in her cleaning, a slut's corner, or who let dirt collect in a sewer or hole in the ground, a slut's hole. An untidy man might occasionally be referred to as sluttish, but for his sloppy jacket, not his unswept floor, because a slut was a doer of menial housework, a drudge, a maid, a servant, a woman. A slut was a careless girl, hands sunk haphazardly into the dough, broom stilled against her shoulder, eyes cast out the window, mouth humming a song, always thinking of something else. Oh, was I ever a messy child, a real slut in the making. My clothes entangled on the floor, my books splayed open and dog-eared, their bindings split, dirty dishes on the bookshelf, sticky spoons glued to the rug. I would never have bathed if not commanded. At a certain point, when I got in trouble and wanted to be seen as good again, I would clean my room, but only when I wanted to be good, not because I wanted to be clean. I already understood that goodness was something you earned, that existed only in the esteem of others. Alone in my room, I was always good, or I was never good. It was nothing to care about alone in my room, unless I was thinking about the people outside and the ways I might need them to see me. The story goes like this. In March 1838, Darwin visited the Zoological Society of London's gardens. The zoo had just acquired Jenny, a female orangutan. The scientist watched a zookeeper tease the ape with an apple. Jenny flung herself on the ground in frustration, precisely like a naughty child. Later, he watched her study a mirror in her cage. The visit led him to wonder about the animal's emotional landscape. Did she have a sense of fairness to offend? Did she feel wronged? And what sense of selfhood would such a reaction imply? What did Jenny recognize in her own reflection? More than a century later, Darwin's musings led to the mirror test, developed in 1970 by the psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. It's sometimes called the mirror self-recognition test and is used to assess an animal's ability to visually recognize itself. In it, an animal is marked with a sticker or paint in an area it cannot normally see. Then it's shown a mirror. If the animal subsequently investigates the mark on its own body, it is seen to perform this self-recognition. Great apes, Eurasian magpies, bottlenose dolphins, orcas, ants, and one Asian elephant are the most frequently cited animals to have passed the test. Just think of all the things a woman could do rather than clean. Which is to say, think of all the pastimes that make her a slut. Reading, talking, listening, thinking, masturbating, eating, observing the ground, the sky, other people or herself, picking a scab, smoking, painting, building something, daydreaming, sleeping, hatching a plan, conspiring, laughing, communing with animals, communing with God, imagining herself a god, imagining a future in which her time was her own. In Samuel Johnson's 1755 dictionary, the precursor to the Oxford English, a slut is simply a dirty woman without any sexual connotation. In the 19th century, a slut also becomes a female dog and a rag dipped in lard to light in the place of a candle. Through the 20th century, its meaning solidifies as an immoral woman, a woman with the morals of a man. It isn't until the 1960s that a slut finally becomes a sexually promiscuous woman, a woman who enjoys sex in a degree considered shamefully excessive. It is a brilliant linguistic trajectory. Make the bad housekeeper a woman of poor morals. Make her maid service to men a moral duty, and every other act becomes a potentially immoral one. Make her a bitch, a dog, a pig, any kind of subservient or inferior beast. Create one word for them all. Make sex a moral duty too, but pleasure in it a crime. This way, you can punish her for anything. You can make her humanity monstrous. Now, you can do anything you want to her. The psychologist Henri Wallin observed that both humans and chimpanzees seem to recognize their own reflections around 6 months of age. In 1931, he published a paper in which he argued that mirrors aid in the development of a child's self-conception. 5 years later, Jacques Lacan presented his development of this idea at the 14th Annual Psychoanalytical Congress at Marienbad. He called it le stade du miroir, the mirror stage. Before it reaches the mirror stage, the infant is simply a conduit for its own experience. Self-conception is piecemeal. Here's a foot, here's a hand, but perhaps closer to what Lacan would later call the real. There is no I. Experience is not mediated by signification or perception. Then the baby sees herself in the mirror. The image of her own body disturbs and then delights her as she identifies with it. The self becomes unified and objectified simultaneously, and the uneasy grasping for a fixed subject begins. The baby cannot tell the difference between the mirror self and the actual self. It is the first story she tells herself about herself. That is me. It is the beginning of self-alienation. In fourth grade, Vicky and I were friends, which meant that we attended sleepovers at each other's houses, played invented games during recess with the same group of girl classmates, and our mothers had each other's numbers. Vicky and I had the same birthday, though by the summer before fifth grade, I understood that our differences far outweighed our similarities. Vicky lived in a characterless mansion on the west side of our town, in a housing development of identical mansions. I lived in a gray shingled house in the woods with a tiny black and white television and cabinets full of foods no one at school had ever heard of. Vicky had more Barbies than friends, and she was very popular. Most notably, Vicky had a pale white popsicle body and freckled cheeks, while I was the first girl in our grade with breasts. Vicky had an early pool party for her birthday, our birthday, but she didn't ask me to share it, and it didn't occur to me that she might have for many years. Now I can see how shrewd that choice, how better for both of us, how awkward it would have been for her to preside over both of our birthdays. In her spacious backyard, she commanded us as she did on the school playground, except on that day, she did it in a pink bikini. The other girls also scampered around her yard in their bathing suits, legs straight as clothespins, bellies bright white, chests flat and unmoving as they ran. I kept my t-shirt on. Underneath it, I wore a bright green one piece with a decorative zipper on the front, bought on sale at the TJ Maxx in town, not the Gap or Puritan, places where I thought only rich people shopped. I would have worn a snowsuit if I could. Excuse me, my guard chihuahua is barking at someone outside, if you can hear it. As we sat around the patio table eating pizza, a girl complimented Vicky on her suit. Vicky waved dismissively as she took a bite and then swiped a dribble of grease from her chin with a paper napkin. We all watched her chew and then regally swallow. This is for babies without boobs, she explained. When I have boobs, I'm going to get one of those suits with a zipper right here. She pointed coyly at her pink top, and I'm going to unzip it all the way down to here. She dragged her finger down until the whole cohort laughed, even me with my heart in my gut. The role of the mirror stage is ultimately to establish a relationship between an organism and its reality, or as they say, between the Innenwelt and the Umwelt. The baby, Lacan tells us, can see herself before she can control herself. It is this temporal dialectic that makes the mirror stage a drama whose internal pressure pushes precipitously from insufficiency to anticipation. This fragmented self is reconciled by the creation of an anticipatory body, an orthopedic form of its totality. The creation of a story about the body. I will have boobs, I will have a bathing suit, I will unzip it all the way to here, to reconcile the distance between the image of the self and the experience of the self allows us to move through space. It is the construction of a fiction that will eventually harden into something else. After presents, Vicky ordered us all into the pool. I lingered at the table and tried to demur, but she insisted, and so I waded into the shallow end with my t-shirt on, its wet hem sticking to my thighs as the whole party watched. No, Melissa, Vicky shouted, exasperated, take your t-shirt off. You can't play with your t-shirt on. Someone giggled. I stared down at the blue water, my feet rippling at the bottom. Then I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled off my shirt. No one said anything. They didn't have to. If I had hoped that it might be seen as luck, me in possession of that thing they all wanted, most of all Vicky, then my hope sank before my shirt hit the concrete. They stared at my zippered swimsuit. No, they stared at my body. And in those scorching moments, I knew that there are some people we love for having the things we don't, and some people we hate for the same reason. Though I spent hours staring in the mirror at that age, I hadn't yet learned how to see my own changed body. That afternoon, I glimpsed her. a glimmering double that others could also see. That was the only thing they could see of me. Vicky and I never played again, not because what girls did at recess or on the weekends was no longer playing, instead a kind of work to become an impossible thing and to discipline the bodies that failed worst at this, but because she had recognized that we were different, a fact I'd already known. It would be another year before anyone would spit in my face, before Vicky or anyone would call me a slut or threaten me or prank call my home, but by the time it happened, I already knew who they meant. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, Zizi.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad that you read that particular part about, well, the Vicky and the girls, but then going back and forth between, you know, some of the Lacanian mirror stage, you know, the mirror stage, and then going into, you know, the origin of the word slut. I mean, for me to just be reading this and to sort of see in which how, you know, women's bodies become, women themselves become arrested by words and concepts, and then, you know, imprisoned by, you know, the society that unthinkingly kind of like goes along with it. And your project here is to sort of force us to slow down, think, look at girlhood, look at, you know, this not as a sort of Bildungsroman, which is sort of like what is the youthful boy going through a coming of age, right, but, you know, what it means for girls to come of age. So in particular, you mentioned, when I say I love it, I don't love it, and I don't love that it happened to you like this, but the girls, you know, like there's the situation where the girls realize, okay, she's developing, beating you, or developing more quickly than I am. But I was mesmerized by how you also talk about men. And so, you know, the girls, on the one hand, you can understand this is sort of like, you know, we've been a swim in this world that sort of told you that this is the culmination. And I remember even earlier, she says, I'm going to put my zipper down to here when I get a bathing suit, et cetera, et cetera. But then it's the men when you talk about how their particular gaze goes from your sort of happy invisibility in one day to all of a sudden, you know, here you are, still a child, 11 years old, and you have the, you know, their gaze upon you, looking at you as a woman. And it reminded me of Tressie McMillan Cotton's essay in Thick, where she talks about the same thing, and about how the fastness, like a girl being fast, is put on the girl, like that's something that's about the girl, where she has no control over this. This is her body. So how long, I know that your essay talks about, your group of essays, your book, you know, your sort of opus of scholarship, as well as everything, you know, talks about, you know, you reckoning with men doing this. But at the time, you know, you saw that this was happening. Did you feel as though they were at fault? I mean, how long did it take for that to occur?
Certainly not. I don't think it's, you know, it's funny because now when I look at 11-year-olds, I mean, I think most of us probably have this experience as we get older, but as someone who felt, it's almost like I believed as a kid that I could, if I just thought of myself as older, I would appear that way to other people. And I did look older than I was, but not much older. You know, 11-year-old can only look so much older than 11 years old. But I didn't think of myself as a child, you know, I was just like my consciousness floating around inside of my experience. And I had this like very distorted sense of my own agency and my own independence. And I think I just was like the kind of kid that decided really early on, I was like, I'm just not going to need a lot of help. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm in a hurry to like move to New York City and not need anyone. And so there was a way that the attention of men when I was a child felt like confirmation of this project that I had taken on for myself. It felt like a compliment. It didn't, you know, there's this like narrative in the culture, and there certainly was then, that to sort of provoke or compel the desire or attention of other people is a kind of power. And I didn't experience it as power so much as it was like thrilling and scary. But it also felt like, yeah, I'm a grown up. Until I was like in a situation I suddenly couldn't get out of, and it was very clear that I was a child and I wanted someone to rescue me, you know? But I certainly like it just was never even, never occurred to me, honestly, for a long time looking back, like, oh, wait a minute, you know, until I got to those ages, like, you know, even older than like in my 20s, where I was like, oh God, you know, it really took a long time for me to let go of that little piece of my self-conception that thought I was so mature, because I just wasn't. I was just a kid who was like trying to hold it all in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm struck by how often I was also thinking, reading Girlhood about, I think it's Victoria Schmidt who talks about the heroine's journey, and how, like, as opposed to like this sort of, supposed Hollywood Chris Vogel, oh, you got it. Is it, wait, put it up again. Because I've been trying to, oh wait, there's another one. Okay. So this is, I don't know if she's, so then there's someone who also talks.
Like, this is like anti-hero's journey plot structure that I bought so I could talk to my students about different options.
Yes, well, this one, I'm like, there must be two ones out there, because I'm almost positive the one I was reading was, by Victoria. But she talks about how, and I don't know if this is the same in this particular book, but she talks about how for women, I mean, I don't know all the audience members out there if you even know what we're talking about in terms of the hero's journey, but there's the hero has to sort of, there's a call to adventure, and it's always men, like there's a call to adventure, and then the hero takes this up and does these things and has these allies and goes on this quest, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But with the heroine's journey, it talks about the first step is this delusion, sort of being disillusioned, with the world as it is, and that's has to be the first step for a woman, because you've been sold this bill of goods, you've been told that like your life can be this way if you live it this way, if you live it in a way in which you're super religious and are good, then nothing bad will happen to you. And of course, we have children who are molested all the time, and you have that scary part later on in the book where there's the guy who, my computer's talking to me, where there's the man who has like, the pictures that he develops, and it's like this 11-year-old on top of him and all these the neighborhood kids, etc. But since we've been sold this sort of bill of goods as women, then the first step begins with this, understanding that this is all an illusion. And I noticed that in several the recurrence of you notice this is an illusion, and there's this growth, and you do this, and there's a one stage, and then there's another where there's another illusion. So it's like, it seems like it's like this way in which I know that I've been that way as well, but it seems as though like I was like, okay, Melissa is so, and I know you too, so it's like this idealism, in which like okay, it's right this time, or things are better this time. You go to the private school, and then some kid says, oh, you're the oversexed whatever. You go to like all of these different instances in your life where you're still having to restart and kind of educate the world on who you are. Like, how did it get to the point where you, and I know you start writing, but how did it get to the point where you knew that this is a pattern, the pattern that you have to actually vocalize it, and actually not just vocalize it, but put it onto the page?
Right. I mean, I think there was I definitely had, that was one of the things I did have sort of consciousness about growing up, where I was like, I don't belong here. Like, it just never felt right. And like, I'm a high school dropout. Like, I just like sort of couldn't get out of my town fast enough. And I knew that like it didn't fit, and I didn't know. I also remember having thoughts when I was a kid where I was like, is it just all of the girls that I become friends with, or do horrible things happen to all girls, or like lots of girls? Like, I really did not know the answer to that, which is that it is lots of girls, until I was like deep into my 20s, because it was like a thing where I was like, is it me? Like, am I the common denominator here? And it's like, no, actually, like, femaleness and patriarchy is the common denominator here. But I don't think I really lucidly understood that writing was a way to interrogate that, and to sort of bring my like calling it idealism is sweet, and in some ways it is, but there's also some denial in there, and just plain innocence, I think, too. I mean, I would say that it's still happening all the way through writing this book. Like, I've understood writing as a place for me where I can be more honest with myself than I can be in any other place ever with any person, like I will hold myself to a higher bar for honesty, and it feels more possible in writing than ever talking with anyone. But even when, like this book, maybe 5 years ago, my agent was like, what are you working on? Like, do you have another book? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just writing these essays. And he said, well, go figure out what they have in common and see if there's a book there. And I went and looked at the essays I'd been writing, and I realized that they had this very clear common denominator of like adolescent girlhood, and sort of using mine as a touchstone to like radiate out and look at other ideas and other people's stories. And I thought, oh, like, I cannot be writing a book about girlhood. Like, it's so boring. Who cares? Like, there's nothing left to say about it. I've already talked about it all in therapy. Like, clearly there's nothing interesting there. Never mind that, like, literally everything I was writing was about that, And so I still don't know what's really going on until I follow my instincts into the work, which sometimes is like, sometimes the sign over the doorway of whatever it is my next project is reads something entirely differently. And when I get in there, I'm like, oh, I'm writing a book about girlhood. Like, I have so much more to say about it, and so many things that, all of the incidents that you've mentioned so far, I still had a story about them, that they were okay, that they weren't a big deal, that they were my fault, like really sort of obvious things that we do to be okay with things that aren't okay. And it wasn't until I wrote the essays that I was like, oh, that's what that was, So it's a work in progress,
Yeah, and also you mentioned you're saying, okay, denialism and maybe more than idealism, but it's also about survival,
Yeah.
and that we all have to, as women, sort of survive girlhood. And I like how you mentioned, you have that great sort of list of all the sort of things that the evolution of the word slut, and then you also have this sort of meditation on witches, and like the idea of the female as a witch. And I was going to read this one part where you said Sigrid Browner writes, and I don't know if I'm saying this right or not when I say Malleus
I don't either.
Maleficarum.
Malleus Maleficarum. I've never heard anybody say it. I've only read it.
Okay. And it says, Sigrid Browner writes, the Maleficarum develops a powerful gender-specific theory of witchcraft based on hierarchical and a dualistic view of the world. Perfection is defined not as the integration or preservation of opposites, but rather as an extermination of the negative element in a polar pair. And because women are seen as the negative counterpart to men, they corrupt male perfection through witchcraft, which must be destroyed. And you then list, similar to how you list about, sort of slut shaming and like what women could be doing rather than cleaning, and like these activities. You list everything that, all the ways in which women died of.
That's the truly shocking list, is like all of the things that a woman in like early European witch trials, and also here, but to a greater extent there, the things that you could be tried and killed for as a witch. It was just like literally anything, like having a third nipple, saying hello to a man, not saying hello to a man, like anything. And so many forms of torture. Oh my God.
And of course, it just replicates what some of the list of things that you bring up later in the book, which is sort of like, being in New York and then having to get used to various catcalls. And it's sort of like, okay, you interview a number of witnesses who are, of survivors, basically, who say, okay, well, I thought that he wouldn't rape me if I did this, or okay, he is raping me, maybe I will be able to survive it if I say this. Or the woman who ends up, being in the middle and just having the thought, I have to leave this room somehow, even though he had penetrated her, and then ended up having to just like say, okay, we need a glass of water, and walked out the door. And so all of those, the witchcraft, everything you talked about with witchcraft, because I kept thinking, oh, this is from so long ago. And actually I did have Stacy Schiff's book here.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, you know, okay, yeah, it's the best. But then you realize, okay, this, of course, the same pattern is happening where no matter what you do, you know, there's still this way in which the woman has to be responsible for, you know, the behavior of the men. So in some ways, like, what then, I guess my sort of question is, what do you think is, and I even feel bad asking this because I feel like women shouldn't have to come up with a solution. But what do you think then we do? I mean, is everyone become a writer like you, a scholar like you, like
Oh God, no.
a memoirist? What can we do? I mean, there's obviously Me Too, but this is so endemic. I mean, this is
Right.
you know,
Right.
we're still put,
Yeah. Yeah. I
living
mean,
through
and
this.
also it's like, I was like, I got this email from a totally lovely person who wanted to ask me about my Me Too memoir. And I was like, oh, right. Like when something's happening, we just see it as the thing that's happening right now, when I feel like that's just feminism. It's been happening for a really long time, or it's just like consciousness raising, or just people talking about the common thing that's been happening to them that they've been taught to never talk about. And so they've thought that they were alone in. And so I think, like, insofar as I understand what has helped liberate me from that like endless double, triple, quadruple bind of feeling responsible for what men do to women, responsible for how to frame the narrative, both in the world, to them, to other people, in my own mind, how to figure out a way to shape it so I can carry it for the rest of my life. The ways that I have found to sort of free myself of that, and writing is one of them, but it really is just articulating aloud to other people what those experiences are, because it is isolation, and silence is truly death, 1,000 different kinds of death. You know what I mean? To not talk about it and to not know if it's happening to other people. And there is a thing that happens, like, I'm a very secretive person, so I've read a lot about secrecy, and there are things that happen in our brains when we keep secrets that build a little cocoon of shame, like it really compounds and perpetuates and reinforces those dynamics. And I think no matter how horrible it feels, like, we have to be able to speak them to each other, in our writing, to ourselves, to our therapists, whatever. Like, that is the number one thing that needs to happen. And I think for me, it's also just about cultivating a consciousness. And like, some of this, I can't remember if I wrote about this in the book, but I remember having a conversation with my partner once just about the insidious nature of my own sort of degrading thoughts about my body. Just like how, even after years and years and years of therapy and feminism and like body positivity, like, the thoughts are still there. And she helped me come up with a strategy that was just writing. I do journal every morning, and do my little morning pages. And I write every morning in my morning pages, today I reject the patriarchy's bad ideas. And I have like so many things that I write every single morning now, but just like to hold it in the foreground of my mind, like, it took a long time. It took centuries for those voices and those stories and those beliefs and those dynamics to be sort of conditioned and embedded in us. And I feel like it takes a similarly kind of careful and repetitive work to undo them. And a lot of it we can do for each other and we can do for ourselves.
You know, one of the things that you talk about doing with other, you know, writers who are in your care, and you were saying this exercise of writing the love letter to a body part. I mean, can you go into that more for the you say everyone who does that is transformed? And reading this, I was sort of like, I kept saying, but what would I even write? Like, but you mentioned here, like, you have to then select something that you do love about yourself, physically, so that you're not rejecting the kind of, the, like, we're not rejecting our forms just because they come burdened with all the sort of the social construct, like patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera.
That opposite action is so powerful and so difficult. And I think I learned a lot about this from like being sober and having so many bad instincts I'd been running on for years and having to just like do the opposite thing over and over and over again. And my poor students, they have really been at the other end of a lot of my personal growth experiments where I think when I was, you know, the essay that Zizi's referring to is one in which I write about like my fraught relationship to my whole body, but particularly to my hands, which are really big.
Oh, I love the hands with that.
And
Like you're like, I was like, I guarantee you I have bigger hands than you do. But go on.
That's what I've been saying to people my whole life, and I've almost always been right. But so I started making my students, and they're like this, I was in my 30s. They are, you know, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And I would sort of like have this long talk about like how what we find most vulnerable, it's our instinct to hide what we find most vulnerable, but actually seeing people sort of assert their vulnerability in empowering ways is transformative and so compelling to us. Like we desperately want to see other people do it because it feels impossible. And so I have them write a love letter to the part of their body that they have had the worst relationship to. And they find it like torturous, but they do it. Like they don't have to do it. I'm just a creative writing teacher and I'm really nice. Like I'm not going to make them do it, but they do it. And then most of them don't want to read it, but sometimes they do. And it becomes like, it's beautiful. Like I swear at the end of one of those classes, a student was like, a boy was once like, can we do this every week? And I was like, yes, we can do this. You can do this every day of your life. And then a follow-up exercise I sometimes have them do is to write a love letter or to write like a poem praising the part of their body that they love the most, which they find even more cringy because it's socially acceptable, especially for women, to speak negatively about our bodies in public, but to speak positively about our bodies in public is like, we hate people who do that, or we're told that we're supposed to hate people who do that. And so, you know, I'm just like, really, I'm trying to practice the things that work for me or that I aspire to, and hopefully like planting little seeds in their minds, because I think it's really possible to undo that stuff. You know, it takes, it's a life's work, but I do believe it's possible.
And I guess I have one more. This is a nerdy question. So I wanted to ask two different questions, but I know that we're getting to the.
You're too smart to not to have any other kind of question.
Well, like because you refer so much to Lacan, and I actually you know I know someone who does the Kim Kardashian, and I threatened to do the
Twitter. That Twitter profile?
Yeah, but I threatened.
I love it.
But yes, I do too. But I also threatened him that I was going to do La Kanye, which would be the matchup of Kanye and Lacan. But but speaking of Lacan, you know, like you do the joy. One of the joys of, well, I wanted to write a writing process question, but I'm going to just ask the nerdy scholarly question. One of the joys of reading this is that your sort of encyclopedia, like, you know, the Times described your work as, you know, this collage, you know, and but then I just feel as though it's like there's this encyclopedic kind of mind at work where you can reference Lacan, you can reference Browner, you can talk about the House of Mirth and make it more like interesting than than any other person who's ever made House of Mirth. You can bring in you know, bits from, you know, like sort of its teleology and kind of bits that are sort of like, you know, getting into like entomological ways.
You go with this as long as you want, just please.
But and then, you know, P.P. Chava, like works of art that come, all of that's great. And Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, which, like, you know, the idea that, you know, she reads this story, you know, she reads her one of her most famous stories in which, you know, the Tiguan girl is told by her mother, do this, do that, you know, do the wash on Sunday, do them on this day, but keep yourself from the slut that you're determined to be, you know, like, and people in your classes or other people, when you show this, they'll laugh at the word slut. All of this is like, you're bringing in personal experiences, these interviews with, you know, women who've been raped and trans, you know, women and everything. But then the question would be, you keep going back to this Lacanian sense of self that is built by social collaboration, and it seems as though the book keeps unfolding by showing, the sort of social collaboration of building a self. Like, so how did you get to this point where you're just like, okay, I'm going to be doing, doing these riffs on Lacan in a way. How did you come to that, I guess?
Yes.
It's actually, I could have made that a lot simpler.
Amazing.
But I have to put in all the other things that
I just want to listen to you articulate your questions, because it's so fun and you're so smart. I don't really understand Lacan. I don't know if anyone does.
Thank you.
And that's why I like Lacan, because it feels like I can do whatever I want with it, because who's going to tell me it's wrong? Like, prove it.
Yeah.
You can't. And I think that's like, sort of the way, like, Lacan wasn't talking to me. Lacan wasn't really writing about my experience. And that actually sort of like working with theorists, it's sort of fun to work with those theorists, because I feel less reverent of their work. Like, I like repurposing it and making it work for my purposes. Like, I don't think Lacan ever imagined that like I was going to be using it in this book about adolescent girlhood, but I actually think that those ideas really do work. And the self, that's like, I also find myself in those descriptions, the little bits that I can understand lucidly enough. And I guess part of that is sort of my goal, right? Is to build or reveal or restore a self by social collaboration. And I want to do work that invites people into that with me. Like, come do this with me. Let's restore ourselves, redefine ourselves. Let's collaborate in a way that creates a whole self that we want to live inside, that somebody else didn't pick or curate or design or impose upon us, So you handed me the answer, but thank you.
That's a great answer. I better get to some of these, the questions in the chat. I'm sorry I took up so much time.
Oh my God,
this has been just phenomenal.
I'm honored to be read by you. It's really
this is great. This is great. We needed to. I didn't want to get the audience with like all our sort of our times at Vermont Studio Center and all the stuff that anyway. But
I have to just tell you, I did an event with Stephanie Dandler.
I watched her. Of course, I read her book and then watched the series, etc.
And it just feels like I don't know.
This is bittersweet,
but
or sweet bitter. It's sweet bitter.
Yeah, it was like we were there for a month. I went back for another residency there and had a horrible time. And I was like, "What is this?" Because that one charmed month that we spent there was like so formative. And
Allison is in the audience, so shout out to Allison. Let me get to these questions though.
Okay.
So Laura Cyphers has a question. When you are being honest with yourself and discovering the stories that you've been telling yourself that may not be the truth, do you hit a wall that stops you from writing? I'm glad she asked the writing question. If so, can you talk about a moment in this book or another one, and how you get through that? And another one here, Whip Smart is back in there, which the kids are the kids, but then there's what am I?
Yeah. Okay. What was the question? The question was, when I'm writing, are there parts of me that want me
may not be telling yourself the truth? And this aspect, and it's one of the questions I want to get to in terms of like memoirization, like what that means, and like in terms of truth, your own latent unreliability, which we all have. Like, none of us is totally reliable. We're always, subjective. But in a memoir, like, you have a special sort of, I think, moral obligation to a certain type of truth. And it seems that's what she's asking. I may be wrong.
I think that, so there's like two ways that this works for me. And one is, there are parts of my psyche that are like half submerged, like a little alligator with just the eyes up. And those parts of me don't want to look at an ugly truth. Like, they don't want to look at the fact that like an 11-year-old or 12-year-old having a sexual interaction with a 20-year-old is like abusive. It's not like experimentation, it's abuse, and so those parts of me want me to tell a story that's like, it wasn't that bad, it's okay. They're the part that there's an essay in the book where I write about lying in my diary when I was a kid, because I just like didn't know how to deal with things that were happening. And it's that part of me that's like, let's just clean it up because we don't know what to do with this. And that does pop up. But I will say that more often, the urge to write is a counter instinct. The urge to write is my own readiness to confront and disrupt that part of myself. That sort of, those are the stories I carry around. And when I want to write about something, I know it's probably time to peel something back. And so writing is not a place where I'm like prettying it up. It's too hard. It's not worth it to lie to myself, you know, like I can imagine for some people it might be, but for me, like I can lie to myself just fine without doing the work of writing a book. Like I don't need to write a book to do that. I'll just tell myself a story. When I'm writing, that's the place where I'm trying to annihilate those stories to get to something more honest. And then I will say there are parts of me that also want to be like, you know, make myself look good or make it sound funnier than it was, or simplify things. And sometimes it's important to simplify things and leave stuff out. But I will also say that one of the great rewards of writing is that it has allowed me, it has been sort of a safe place for me to look at the ugliest parts of myself. And again, if I want to tell myself a nice story about myself, I can do that. I do it all the time over the course of any given day. But that's not what I write for. I don't need to write for that. And so when that stuff pops up when I'm writing, as it inevitably does, is like, well, maybe you could just make the other person look worse. And it's like, nope, I need to scrutinize myself worse than anybody else that I'm ever writing about. And if I'm not doing that, it really just doesn't feel like there's a point.
Wow, that's a great answer. Mary Henson has, I think, also a great question here. She or they say, immediately after the 2020 election, several people referred to Kamala Harris as Jezebel. And there were conversations regarding Jill Biden's right to call herself doctor. I'm sure you have a comment regarding this phenomenon. I mean, I think that's sort of interesting that like the calling stuff, you know.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really easy one. It's just misogyny. It's like women in power make us deeply, deeply uncomfortable. By us, I just mean like American men. Not.
But I think, you know, I will say, I think women internalize this is what a good swath. I mean, it couldn't work if you didn't also have women who
of course, like women in power, a Black woman in power, like it makes me nervous all of the time. Like you know what I mean? And I'm so grateful to see those women in those positions, especially Kamala, but there is no surprise and no, you know what I mean? Of course, we can't even handle a woman like feeling okay about her body just walking down the street, let alone a woman like in the second most powerful office in this country. Like, forget it.
Yeah.
You know?
There's another one that says, you know, you mentioned that you were a high school dropout. Did you encounter any authors or literary characters in your childhood or adolescence who presented a radical or different idea of what girlhood or womanhood was?
I did. Speaking of rest in peace, Beverly Cleary. I know Ramona Quimby, who is like certainly
Ramona Quimby, age 8,
moving against the grain. Pippi Longstocking. My mom also, who is the most incredible woman, used to go with a Sharpie in my children's books and change the genders of the characters.
Oh, that's great.
And so actually my children's books were full of like plucky, powerful, adventurous.
She was revising them. That's great.
Yeah. So I had a very sort of curated early child and all of the like Chronicles of Narnia and all sorts of like favorites that I'm sure are familiar for people. But yeah, I definitely think that I don't really, sometimes I think about being a high school dropout and I think like, how did I have the balls to just drop it? Because I wasn't like, I didn't get kicked out of school. I was like, I hate this, I'm leaving. I'm going to be a writer, which like, I'm such a rule follower now. I don't really understand it, but I do think I had a good models in books and in grown women, especially my mother.
We also had that scary list of all the women characters who, when they deviated in some way in terms of like loving themselves, like they deviated in terms of love, you know, there's Tess of Dubervilles, there's Anna Karenina,
they get raped and they die, they kill themselves. Yeah. But I wasn't reading I wasn't reading Tess and House of Mirth when I was a kid, thank goodness. It was like Frog and Toad and Pippi Longstocking.
Someone says, thanks so much for sharing these writing prompts exercises with us. In the same vein, I'm wondering if there are any assignments or other jumping off points you encountered earlier in your career that really helped you to unlock your thinking and writing in the way these have seemed to work for your students.
Interesting. Zizi, will you think about this too? Do you have any from like being a student? I have to think all the way back. I'm like, I definitely had, it was like, I loved assignments. They've all just leaked out of my head, but I definitely remember very specific things that creative writing teachers said to me. I remember a teacher in undergrad, Irini Spanadu, a novelist, said to me in a conference once, she said something to me about voice, where she was just like, just cultivate your own voice. Like it will feel weird. It feels more comfortable to sort of imitate whatever other people are liking, but just like do your own thing. And eventually that will be worth it, And I still remember it. I was like on drugs, 19 years old, whatever. And I still remember that. So it must have been important, And I have my thesis advisee, Vijay Seshadri, once said to me, don't indulge your strengths. And that totally changed. And it sounds sort of like a negative thing, but it wasn't. It was like I was hiding in the things I knew I was good at, and I was hiding from the things that were unfamiliar to me because I was afraid to fail. And he was basically saying, like, go fail at those things and get better at them so that you're not hiding.
My thing, I don't know if this is really the answering the question, but sometimes, anything that's sort of like a famous adage or maxim, I kind of think, write with that, like take that and then just sort of subvert it to what you think it could be. It could be the exact opposite. So one of the ones that I gave people was like, I forget who said it, but it was hurt people, like people who are hurt, hurt other people. So write an instance in which a hurt person hurts another person, but they're not explicitly telling you what their hurt is. Like you have to figure this out by way of how they hurt the other person.
Oh, that's good.
But
I'm gonna put that.
And there's,
I just put it in my pocket.
Oh, okay. I was like, something happened. My student of yours says hello. There's a couple of things. Someone writes here, as I get older, I realize how much ageism I've internalized and how often I catch myself feeling awful about becoming older and looking older. Your fight with patriarchal mindsets on female appearance makes me wonder how you are dealing with this inevitable, if we're lucky, issue.
How am I dealing with aging? I don't know.
Well, I think it's not just aging, it's sort of aging in this world that we're in. It's like if we were just allowed to age, that'd be great.
I mean, I have to say, I had this amazing experience where, like, I've written some in the book about being sort of street harassed when I was a younger woman. And it was like right around 35, which was some years ago now. It didn't stop happening, but it tapered way off. And for a minute, I was like, what happened? And then I was like, oh, I'm so much more free now that I don't feel men looking at me all the time. And this is kind of peripheral to the question, but it occurred to me in the intervening years since then, that it wasn't that I had become less interesting looking to men. It was, or like not physically, but it was that I would not tolerate their behavior and I would not entertain their bullshit questions and I would not smile for them at 35. Like there was just no way any of that was going to happen. It was just going to be like, and continue walking. And that is part of the invisibility of aging, is just that men don't see me as prey anymore because I won't take it. But I have to say, like, I have felt really glad that my community is so many women and so many queer women, because in many ways I feel really protected from that. And of course, not entirely protected from it. And there are like moments and narratives and things that pop into my head and things I fantasize about correcting. But for the most part, it feels like pretty gentle, And part of that, honestly, is that my partner is a woman who is like so evolved in this way and has like such a healthy attitude towards it, that when I start to go down that path, she's like, and she totally like fetishizes my aging in ways that I really, she's
Great.
Sofa laughing behind me. Not fetishize, but like we like each other's gray hair. Like it's compelling, Like I actually, it has
Whereas I'm
nothing.
covering my gray hair, but go on.
I mean, there are things that I'm doing too, but
I'm 48, so I'm in a different stages. But let me get in these two more. I'll put them in together.
Okay, good.
I thought both of them were great. Eden Waring says, you teach your students to make a list of all the memories that we think we can never ever write about, no matter what, and then write them. And she asks if you've come to the bottom of your own list, and then asking about transfiguring your memories so that you can write about them forever.
She's speaking from experience. This is a former student of mine. Hi, Eden.
And the other one was about being honest with yourself in memoir. And this is Aisha Muharar asking me as well, what's your process of honesty in fiction? So we can we have about 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left.
I'll just say that I have gotten pretty far down the list of things that I couldn't write about, but there are things that are that feel private, and there are things that feel private because they belong partly to other people. Mm-hmm. And there are still things that I can't imagine saying in front of other people. And I don't know if that's a matter of time or whether that will ever be possible, but I mean, maybe I'll just become like a comic or something when that happens and all this heavy stuff will be done. But Zizi, this question is for you. I'm looking at it.
Oh, yeah. Well, the honesty in fiction, I think it is a good question, because I feel as though I hate when people think, oh, fiction is just lies. Northrop Frye talked about how fiction was not counter to truth, but it's a hypothetical world. So it's not entering into the realm of like a sort of binary, true or false. It's a hypothetical, and thus the honesty is the honesty and the sort of ethical kinds of considerations that we have in, I think, in nonfiction as well. So even though we're talking about I always try to get my students to think in terms of like, is the character doing this because this is what they would do, or because you want them to do this? Mm-hmm. And so the honesty is also just, it doesn't have to be in the completely realist mode, meaning you don't have to be like, modernist, ultimately hyper realist, for it to be honest. But you do, like in any like genre, Western, whatever, like you'd still have to sort of think to yourself, well, how am I trying to portray the world? Is this the way that jives with my worldview? And what am I trying to show, the reader, the rest of the world? And that is like a sort of an honesty that's on the level of like integrity, like which goes to the deeper root of like the word integral, like that means to be to knit together, and many disparates as a part and a whole. So fictional honesty is more about integrity, I think. And
oh my God,
truth, I could listen telling of a larger truth.
I could listen to you talk about this forever. Just anything, or just like read me your grocery list. You're very good at talking, and I mean it. It's like being read by you feels so good and so special.
Oh, this was so great to read. I mean, I loved it. I just loved hearing your mind on the page once more. Like I remember Melissa, in summer now, like 6 years ago, you were like so excited. You were piecing together things, and you'd have like all of these things. You'd be like in this sort of, I hate to use the word fever dream because that's not what it was, but you're in a kind of just, you're feverishly working and like bringing in all of these, bits and pieces from all these great thinkers, and you yourself were the overlay, the thinking. So that was just great to witness that again.
And dancing and swimming and like eating bread and butter. That was an indulgent summer. It was a good time.
Well, let me see how I want to thank Claire and the Harvard Bookstore for just allowing this conversation to happen. and the Harvard Bookstore is just the pillar of the community. I mean, we just, everyone, it's been a while since I've physically gone in, but I
was telling Claire before the reading that like when I dropped out of high school, I moved to Boston, and I used to I worked at Tuscanini's, the ice cream shop in Harvard Square, for years, and I would go into the Harvard Bookstore and just walk around and like smell the books and fantasize about like being an author, doing a reading there. So it's a special kind of honor. Thank you, Claire, and the Harvard Bookstore.
Well, thank you both for your kind words about the bookstore, but also that really great conversation. And the way you answered the questions, it was fascinating and so interesting. And I'm sure our viewers felt the same way. And also a big thank you to everyone out there who spent your evening with us. You can learn more about and purchase Melissa's book at harvard.com or via the link in the chat. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, have a great night. Keep reading and please be well. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Take care. Thanks,
Good night.
Melissa. Congratulations.
Thank you.